Hello, my name is Travis Johnson. I'm the General Manager of Ranch Mart Wine and Spirits. Today we're going to prepare and assemble the Old Fashioned cocktail, which recently we discussed at length the history and legacy of this particular cocktail. But we're going to demonstrate the prep, the logistics, and most of the tools that you're going to need to be able to assemble this at home. The vast majority of the work behind the scenes at a bar is done well in advance. All of this we can speed up so you can have it ready immediately, and we'll talk about that stuff today. We'll discuss some of the tools, but most of these are very normal tools. You can pick these stuff up and you don't even have to leave this block actually. Pretty much everything we're going to use today is available here in this store or available at the hardware store across the street or one of the bar stores immediately in our surroundings. The first step of this process, and the longest part of this process, is going to be preparing salted caramel simple syrup. Now, this is my recipe and I've worked on it for quite some time. It is a bit tricky and finicky, so what we're going to focus on a little bit is some of the tools that are in front of us. If you'd like to prepare the water, dump that out, go ahead and fill it all the way up. Pass it back to me when you're ready. These are very sturdy Pyrex. Caramel, the solution, when you're creating the candy, caramel, the solution, is actually incredibly volatile. So you're going to need a very sturdy vessel to prepare this in. Now, the preparation, I've created a process where we'll just do this right in the microwave. So that eliminates a lot of the most tricky parts of this process, but you will need an incredibly sturdy vessel. So what we have here are Pyrex vessels. Pyrex is nearly indestructible and will do exactly the jobs that we need it to do. We have steaming near boiling water here and the baker's sugar. Baker's sugar is important for this process because we're going to need this to dissolve completely. So we're going to add about tea temperature water volume onto 1 1/3 cups of baker's sugar. Baker's sugar dissolves very quickly, so this will become a clear solution relatively fast. We've got the sugar in here and it's going to dissolve slowly as we add this water up to about 2 cups of concentration. And once this is stirred clear, we're going to add a tiny bit of lemon juice. That lemon juice is going to stop the process that caramelized sugar naturally goes through, and that's crystallization. Crystallization can ruin an entire batch of caramel and it can ruin your caramelized simple syrup, so we're going to interrupt that whole thing by adding just a little bit of lemon juice. This sugar solution, if you go to the internet, there are so many recipes for simple syrup and they tell you so many different ways to use so many different tools to put this on the stove and add water. None of that is even remotely necessary, because as you can see here, we have simple syrup just like that. If we put this in an ice bath, this would be ready for a cocktail. But instead of putting it in an ice bath, we're going to stir in a tiny drop of lemon juice. This process can be done entirely in the microwave in less than 30 minutes, even for a low wattage one. The one that we're going to use isn't even 1,000 watts, so we've dialed that into an amount of time that's, relatively speaking, under 25 minutes. Part of this process is going to be smell, sensation, and observation. Now, as this cooks, you will be able to smell when this begins to caramelize. Once that happens, you'll want to check in on this every 30 seconds or so, because caramel is a very unforgiving substance. If you get even a little bit of this too cooked or too wrong, if you forget the lemon juice, everything can go horribly awry almost immediately. But what we have here is simple syrup, and we're going to put that in the microwave and turn it into caramelized simple syrup. All right, now what we have here is an incredibly volatile and dangerous substance, and that is liquid caramel syrup. So we're going to salt this. And we're going to have our stirring pitcher ready. And we're going to have our boiling water ready to go as well. This reaction is going to be incredibly violent So keep your head, face, and everything else away. And now we're going to stir that mild explosion down. We're going to add water to keep the thickness adjusted correctly. All right, what we're going to do here is we're going to dissolve salt into an ice bath. So we want to render our very volatile, very hot, mildly dangerous mixture into something that can be used pretty much instantaneously. So we're going to make a salt bath that decreases the freezing temperature of water and will allow our water mixture with ice to absorb all of the incredible heat that is still locked into that caramelized simple syrup mixture. We're going to transfer this to the most utility vessel of any bar, the shaker tin. And then we're going to submerge this into our salt water and ice bath. We have our salt water mixture. That's going to go onto our ice for our ice bath. Shaker tin's going to go in there. We're going to add a little more water in here to help it absorb all of the heat that's going to be rolling off of this fresh caramel. We're going to move our salted caramel into our cooling tin. The salt and the water are going to help cool that very quickly. And then this process, although you can expedite it by stirring, is largely going to take care of itself. Now we're going to talk about bitters. Bitters are one of the only things that old-fashioned people agree on, regardless, that they should always go in there. The ones that we have in front of us here, there are two of the oldest. This is a recipe of Peychaud's, which is the famous New Orleans bitters, the Sazerac bitters, and this is Angostura, the first commercially available bitters in existence. Now, both of these were made by apothecaries as cure-alls or fixatives for all sort of ailments, stomach ailments, the vapors, all these old-timey, old-fashioned diseases that science would later on help with. They used to actually treat with tinctures like this. The Angostura here came from South America, and this was made by a Creole named Antoine Peychaud. We use the Bitter Truth because it's much better than that old recipe, which is now owned by a mega corporation and isn't that great. Over 20 years, I would design a carefully tested balance of all of these bitters together, and I would use that for all of my whiskey drinks. We're going to use an upcycled Fever Tree bottle, a regular spill stop pourer, a funnel, and a jigger. And the recipe that we're going to use here is my favorite blend. We're going to keep all of them. We're going to make a small batch that we're going to use. That way you can keep all your bitters and use them for their individual properties, but you can have one ready for your old fashions and Manhattan cocktails if you choose to do so. The recipe here, so you can explode this up or shrink it down if you need to, is going to be 1 part Angostura, half part cherry and orange. The orange that I use here is from Fee Brothers. Fee Brothers bitters are one of the reasons that we still have bitters in existence. Through the long dark of post-prohibition, they kept doing what they were doing, even in the face of bankruptcy, and they might be the reason that this one still exists too. So no matter what anybody says about Fee Brothers, and they make theirs out of glycerin instead of alcohol like this one and this one do, no matter what they say about Fee Brothers, they're still one of the best, and they get a pass because they might be responsible for bitters still existing when Dale DeGroff would come back in 1985 at the Rainbow Room and shine a light on how awesome all of this stuff is. Now, if you open a regular bottle of bitters like this, most of the time you're going to find a little tiny cap in here, and that cap is going to stop the process of this free flowing out of the bottle and becoming a spill. We've removed those in advance because we're going to make our solution here. We're going to pour it right out of the top. But normally you're going to have to put a little device in there and pop that bitters cap out before you do what we're about to do. So 1 part, so we're going to do 1 ounce because that's the easiest thing to do. And all of these tools, again, we're going to use every day behind the bar. Now we're using the Makoto style jigger here for a very specific reason. The broader the rim of your jigger is, the less accurate it is. Because the vast majority of the liquid held inside this vessel here is held at the very, very top. And if your top is really wide, then that is a very inaccurate jigger. That means very little is at the base and the vast majority of it's at the top. If you fail to fill that rim full, then you've lost a fraction of your measurement. And we want to be accurate here, although you can balance your own recipe. And I recommend everyone use the balance of the bitters that they prefer, but do that by trial and error. Figure out what it is that you like the most and play with that. Stretch it, exercise your palate, figure out what works for you. So we're going to do 1/2 of this, but inside this Japanese jigger, besides the 1/2 ounce mark that I just filled that to, there's also a 3/4 ounce mark. And that's why we're using this specifically, because that makes it really easy to measure the quarter part that is going to be the creel. So before we pour this in, we're going to measure our quarter part, line in to line in, before we pour that. And now we've used just 1 vessel to make 2 different measurements and stayed extremely precise. And now for probably my favorite, for a whole host of reasons, is the Fee Brothers Gin Barrel Aged Orange Bitters. This goes into a barrel vacated by one of my all-time favorite gins. This barrel is filled by a gentleman who makes Ransom Old Tom gin. That gin is dark and spicy and a lot closer to Genever than it is like a London Dry style gin, because it's dark and barrel aged, and the spice profile in there resembles darkness, like coriander and cinnamon and things like that. It makes a Tom Collins that would change your entire life, but it also makes an astoundingly complex and rich and savory bitters. So that's going to be our last ingredient. Get every last drop of our bitters out of there. And now we're going to blend this guy up. Take our little funnel out of here and we're going to set it on our mat. Now we're going to take our regular spill stop and we're just going to snap it right into the top of this, which takes a little bit of effort. Seals nice and tight. We're going to blend this up. Now, there's going to be 2 different openings on your regular spill stop to leak-proof pour. One of them is the vent hole, and it's right here. And one of them is the main exit hole, and it's right there. So we're going to cover both of those, and we're going to blend this. We're going to release the air hole, and now our bitters blend is ready to go, fully mixed. Now we can talk about whiskey. As we covered previously, the original cocktails that were made with brown spirits in this country were usually one of 2. 1, apple brandy or applejack, and 2 was rye whiskey. New York was a rye town, so all of the wonderful classic cocktails that came out of New York were based on rye. What we have here are actually both bourbons, mainly because these are 2 of my favorite whiskeys. And the person we're ultimately making this old-fashioned cocktail for is ourselves to consume. That's what's most important, your palate and what you enjoy. If you want to put on a whiskey show or compare and contrast, rye whiskey is absolutely phenomenal. It will make a great and respectable cocktail for anyone. What we have here are 2 of our single barrel select whiskeys. So when I choose a single barrel, it works a little bit different at this store than it does at other places, because I go and visit these distilleries. I talk with the master distiller and the owner. I go and visit the rick house. I walk through, and when I taste the barrels, frequently I'm tasting whiskey directly out of those barrels like a master blender or a noser would. Sometimes we sit at a bar and we talk about cocktails and we try a bunch of different samples, but I go there and I visit with them. And what we have here our Wood Hat Spirits cask strength bourbon whiskey, high wheat, blue corn, Missouri bourbon. And we have Hayes here at Boot Hill over in Dodge City, Kansas. This is our single barrel straight bourbon whiskey. They are very, very different, juxtaposed against one another. We're going to use today the cask strength bourbon whiskey from Gary at Wood Hat because I like my astringency. I like my cocktails to be really strong, and I want the booze to leave an impression both in effect and in taste and profile. We could use this one, it would be just as excellent, mainly because the dark spice profile here is one of a kind. I've compared this multiple times to Ron Burgundy's Bookshelf as it tastes of mahogany and cedar and sandalwood, which is actually pretty phenomenal. The first single barrel I ever did with Hayes at Boot Hill actually tasted like it was made from chocolate covered cherries, which was a spectacular achievement, and that's part of what goes into whiskey making. There's stuff that happens once that stuff goes into a barrel that isn't really explainable. And the best don't actually try to explain it because it doesn't really matter if the effect is good and the growth is really excellent. Boot Hill, what Hayes does is actually grows his own grains. So on top of making grain to glass whiskey, he also grows the grains that go into it. This is the Viski Clear Ice Cube Maker. There are many processes for making the big, dense, square cubes here. There are a few processes that are both affordable and will provide you with professional-looking, crystal clear cubes to create the perfect cocktail experience at your bar. This is pre-made. You just fill this guy up with regular tap water. The natural physics of the universe are going to push all the impurities down into the base here where there's a reservoir. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to pull the actual physical mold out of the base, and we're going to set them here, and you can see as they cure. Now the curing process here is going to take this ice in its very, very cold state where it's very fragile, and it's going to render that a lot more solid as it evens out in temperature. These will become crystal clear. We'll use ice cubes just like this to make our cocktail. Now this process altogether for these 2 cubes does take, depending on the quality of your freezer, somewhere between 24, maybe a little bit longer than 24 hours. But the cost here is extremely low. This is very easy to use. You don't need any other specialized tools or equipment. Just goes in the freezer. And we can actually see the process as it cures. And what you're going to be left with are 2 very pretty crystal clear, very solid and dense ice cubes. We have all of our prepared ingredients. We are ready for service. My favorite whiskey, salted caramel simple syrup. Bitters blend, precise Japanese jigger, preparation vessel. This is our Makoto style crystal preparation glass. This is a crystal mixing glass. So, as should all things start, we're going to start with the ice in here. When we mix a cocktail, whether it's shaken or stirred, there are going to be secret ingredients that no one really thinks of that go into that end cocktail. If you're stirring, the secret ingredient is melt water. You don't want too much, you want just the right amount. You want that melt water to contribute to the overall cocktail, and you want everything to mix up very, very nicely. So right when we're ready for service, we're going to put the ice in here, and then we're going to combine the ingredients in the order that they most need to be dissolved, and in the least expensive order. The least expensive order is important because if you get this wrong, whatever you have to throw out is going to be the cheapest ingredients. That's an old bar trick, but it will probably serve you very well at home. So we're going to fill this guy with ice, and we're going to prepare our cocktail. Now the small service ice that we're using here is different from the large ice we're going to land this cocktail on. What a lot of people get wrong is that less ice actually means more melt water. So we're going to use as much ice as this vessel can hold and still be an operable mixing device. And then we're going to add our ingredients. We're not going to measure this. We're going to use my many years of experience and how I like my cocktail to be prepared. This is going to go right on top of the ice. And if you like a sweet cocktail, you'll put about a quarter circle on there. If you like a more dry cocktail, you'll do about a dime circle on there. So sugar first, bitters next, and we're going to move the whiskey in. Whiskey's going to go last. If you measure right over your mixing vessel, if you spill, it just goes right into the cocktail and everybody wins. The Old Fashioned is a quite strong cocktail, so it gets a 2-ounce pour, like a great martini or a Manhattan. And now we are ready to stir this. Now there's secrets to stirring too. You're gonna put the flat of your spoon up against the base of your vessel, and that's where you're going to agitate everything. You're gonna circle around, and it's slowly gonna combine in there. Your melt water is going to blend, and then your cocktail is ready for straining and service. Take your handy julep strainer, and you're gonna tuck it right into there. You're gonna lock this guy in. You're gonna put the spoon over behind him. That's gonna keep excess ice from going into your cocktail. And you're gonna pour this right over your big, gorgeous, clear ice cube. You're gonna protect everything here. Silky, wonderful, boozy goodness. The difference between stirring and shaking is going to be oxygen bubbles. That's the additional ingredient when you shake a cocktail. You're going to add air bubbles that happen when all that stuff gets smashed up in the vessel, and that's going to change the texture of your cocktail. The texture of your cocktail here is going to change from very silky and fine to something that is slightly bruised and less than desirable. So a great Old Fashioned, a great Manhattan should always, always be stirred. Same thing with tomato juice, actually. If you shake tomato juice, it kind of turns to slime as texture goes. So these little individual steps are important. It might look flashier to shake this cocktail, but it's going to actually change the presentation and the mouthfeel of this. And what you want is nice, silky mouthfeel. This should be a wonderful cocktail to enjoy. Okay, now this cocktail is ready for garnish. We're gonna take our washed orange. We're going to cut a little bit deeper into this because we want some pith and some structure. We're gonna warm this orange peel with this match head so all of the oil expresses out to the surface. We're gonna toast that oil over a nice wooden match. Gonna burn all the sulfur off. All that nice, toasty, smoky orange oil is gonna rub around the outside of the glass. And we're gonna set him right inside, right beside the ice cube. We're gonna take our Luxardo cherry, put it on our cocktail pick, and then that's gonna go right alongside there to complete this cocktail. Cheers, love.